And we're off. Here we go down the home stretch. Race, race, race to the finish. Now, about 5 lectures left in our course this year and our time together, sadly. Today's is country specific, so pay attention to that. And you'll hear countries referenced in remaining lectures, but the remainder of these talks, the remainders of the notes, are very big picture, very getting you to connect. So just remember, we've been doing that all semester. So just try and see when we go through these lessons, through these lectures, where you've seen this before. How is this similar to something else? How does this kind of tie various countries together? And you should be all set. But that's not today. Today, we're going to look at a couple of places specifically. We're going to look at Japan, some of its friends, and then China. And we're going to look at how they both, especially Japan and China, how they both shifted economically post Second World War and then at the end of the Cold War. So here we go. All right. So this is Japan and the Asian tigers. And there they are. There is Japan, and there are these four other Asian states, and they comprise the Asian tiger. So you have Japan, South Korea, you have Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore. All right, so here we go. Still sounds like an 80s band to me. All right. Make myself as nondescript as possible. All right. So after World War II, if you remember, we occupied Japan, and we rebuilt Japan in our image. We instilled democracy. We instilled the capitalist model. Not that I don't think that was much of a stretch for Japan, but I mean, a little command economy because of the war. But the capitalism thing is a big deal. Japan's armed forces were disbanded. Again, when you lose the war, you tend to really, really lose. They could never use an aggressive war against, again, the military that they are allowed to keep is purely defensive and purely protectionary. They are not to have any military, anything expansive enough to actually lead an attack against another country. In fact, we're still responsible for their defense. How's that for a pretty cushy deal? And then this just is part of the Articles of Surrender, dealing with just that. Japan created a new constitution, making it a democracy, limiting the power of the emperor. He's no longer considered divine. That's a huge change, and he is much more figurehead. He was before the war, now he definitely is. We elected the Diet. The Diet is Japanese parliament. Women got the right to vote, basic rights, speech, press, those things that we take for granted to the point of them, being, anyway, take for granted. Those are protected now in Japan. Again, when you have to answer to the people, you tend to do things that make the people happier. All right, so there is the peace treaty being signed in San Francisco, and this also ended the U.S. occupation of Japan. So this is a 10-year process. I believe Shigeru Yoshida was Japan's first prime minister. Whoops, excuse me. So it ended, I'm sorry, 7 years. It ended in 52. And ironically, and very interestingly enough, you would think of after, going all the way back to the fleet, and I always want to say Admiral Halsey, and it wasn't Halsey. In the 19th century in Japan, realizing it had to sort of morph into a Western country so that it could repel Western countries. And then they bomb us, and then we go to war with them, and then we drop 2 nuclear weapons on them, and then we occupy them, and yet they're still an ally of ours after all that. That's interesting to me. What you see here is just that. It's after World War II, again, 1956, they have what is called the economic miracle. They're, of all the post-war countries who were not America, their economy boomed, and in no small part due to our infusion of cash and I don't want to say leadership, but people over there in Japan for those 7 years Not to mention the fact that they had figured it out. Before then, they had industrialized. They'd figured out how to be an industrial country. So now it's just a matter of, here it is. Now it's just a matter of being more of a market-based economy than a military or a command-based economy. So everything's set for Japan to be successful. These are Zaibatsu Atsets. Remember that group from earlier in history? They legalized labor unions during our occupancy. Occupation is not a word. Occupancy. They redistributed land and they tried to break up the Zaibatsu. Japan adopted the latest technologies in this industry. It rebuilt cities. It rebuilt factories. I mean, think about all the jobs that rebuilding a city begets. That it just fosters by its very nature. So Japan gets right to the act of rebuilding itself. They have a very well educated, very skilled workforce because, again, this has been part of their makeup for a while. That is cool. That's a cool view. Living in a modern city and seeing Mount Fuji. The government was prohibited from spending money on defense. So, again, if you're not spending money on your military, that's a lot of capital to invest in other things. So, in a way, they're losing the war. Winds up being a very, very good thing because not being able to get involved in that military-industrial complex, not trying to keep up with the United States and the Soviet Union because those were the terms of the treaty. All those hundreds of millions of billions of dollars can be invested in other places. Now, that does not mean that there are not people in Japan then or now who think they should divest into military. These are some of the corporations that you all know and love. I like how they have Sega in the middle. That was my first gaming system. Yep, I had a Sega before. I played on Nintendos, but Sega was the first one I bought. Played hockey and played Mortal Kombat. A lot of Mortal Kombat. All right. Japan adopted high tariffs to limit foreign competition. Again, this is not a new policy. A lot of countries think about post World War I, post World War II, not so much, but post World War I, lots of countries went back to this protectionist type of tariff to help get their industries on their own feet. And yet, even with a tariff, because of this tariff, even with this tariff, they're sending out more stuff than they're importing. So Japan can make so what that should tell you is that Japan can make a lot of what it needs, and it makes a lot of things that people want. That's a pretty good situation to be in. I think their biggest issue without any kind of development would be arable land. But Japan's not the most fertile country. All right. By 2016, Japan becomes the fourth largest economy in the world. A little fun fact. It might be struggling now, but I know for a fact about 5 years ago, the sixth largest economy in the world was the state of California. So imagine if, all that talk about, California, we should just get rid of California, all the hippie, whatever. Well, that's a lot of economy. All right. The next part of our group, here are the four tigers, Asian tigers, the 13th, the 45th, the 22nd, and the 40th richest countries on the planet. And there are other ones in here. And remember, Hong Kong, not a country. There are other countries in this part of the world that are actually doing quite well. We spoke of Vietnam is actually, for itself, all things considered, doing quite well. And Vietnam's right there. You know where Vietnam is. Several smaller states known as the Asian Tigers follow Japan's economic model: Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, and South Korea. So they, too, tariffs on exports, a highly educated, highly skilled working class. Tariffs on imports, excuse me. They are creating goods that the world wants to a surplus. And again, that's, if you stop and think about two of those countries China considers theirs, and Taiwan and Hong Kong is now. But from an economic standpoint, it would make sense for China to reassert dominance and keep these countries. But autonomy is a funny thing. Speaking of China, I told you this is going to go by quick. We're going to make a lot of hay here. I'm going to try and get 3 of these done tonight, so that we can actually finish Tuesday. Because remember, you have a test Wednesday. So we saw how Japan did it. 1, with a little U.S. help, and then 2, although the slides don't say it, the reading does from your books. And again, everything we've covered to now shows you how Japan got to that point. So now we're going to take a look at what China begins to do from Mao moving forward. All right. So here we go. Speaking of Mao, China, an enemy of the United States during the Cold War. U.S. refused to recognize the People's Republic of China. Remember, it was Taiwan is what we recognized as China. We didn't visit China and recognize it as a country, mainland China, until Nixon went in, I believe, 72 from previous lectures. So China, that's just how we felt to China. China, yay. China has no love for Russia, apparently. In the 1970s, the relationship with the United States improved. China was allowed into the UN, so it took until 1970. Nixon visited China. Oh, and then we finally recognized. So Nixon recognized China, and the Nixon administration said, "Hello, China." That was horrible. But we did not recognize China until 1979. Dude, I was 13. I didn't know this. I was 13 years old. And we finally recognized China. And Spain was fascist until I was 9. Okay, sorry, the nerd in me. In 76, Mao Zedong died, and he was replaced by Deng Xiaoping. Now, Deng replaced China's command economy with sort of a socialist market economy. The state's going to maintain control of the industries. The state's going to maintain control of what it deems necessary. But it does allow for more entrepreneurship, more capitalism, more investment from private individuals into the economy. So still communist, still socialist, but not strict fundamentalist communist socialist. It does not matter if it's a cat, if it's red or white, so long as it catches mice. So again, it does not matter what kind of economy you have, so long as it helps your country. It does not matter what kind of government you have, using this metaphor, so long as it helps your country. The dollars are mice. Okay, China is now carrying out a reform. I am all in favor of that. There is no other solution for us. After years of practice, it turned out old stuff didn't work. In the past, we copied foreign models mechanically, which only hampered the development of our own productive forces. We made some mistakes on our own, as well as the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. Such as the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, which were our own inventions. In fact, during the 2 decades from 58 to 78, China remained at a standstill. There was still little economic growth and not much of a rise in the people's standard of living. How could we go on like that without introducing reforms? So in 78, we formulated a new basic political line to give first priority to the drive for modernization and the strive to develop the productive forces. Deng Xiaoping. He's saying that basically China's getting in their own way, that the problems China faces were made by the Chinese, and that we cannot continue doing this. We cannot maintain status quo. It's only going to hurt us. I find it interesting that he talks about that their own productive forces were hampered by looking at things from other countries and just going out about and just going through the motions. Well, here's exactly how they do it, so here's how we're going to do it. Ironically, he's talking about taking a little bit of a Japanese model, which you would never get them to admit in 1978 or here in 87. So he's just reflecting here. Look, this is what we had to do. He emphasized the 4 modernizations to modernize farming, industry, science, technology, and defense. If we're going to be a player, and remember what that term is for when you modernize quickly, when we're going to be a player, we got to do it quickly, we have to do it smartly, and we have to focus on these 4 areas. Science and tech is one area. He replaced communes with a household responsibility system. Families produce and market crops, and consumers sell the surplus. So instead of everybody growing all the crops, pooling it all, and selling it, you would take, if the commune had 50 families in the commune, you would split them into 50 families, and they each have a responsibility. So there still seems to be a quota system, but if they're allowing the individuals to sell surplus, then there's much more of a motivation or incentive to be a successful farmer. If as we see this here, they get to keep their surplus. So as opposed to a commune, we got to grow 50 bushels of wheat a month. Here is, look, here's what we need you to grow. You're responsible for this much. If you grow more, have at it. China's government permitted private business with state control, that kind of corporatist look, allowing industries to keep profits after paying fees and taxes. So basically, the government says, look, you can own a business. Here's what we want from it. Make sure you vote for us. Support our decisions. After you take care of this fee, the rest is yours. The Special Economic Zone. Deng welcomed foreign investment in China. He set up a special, just like in the 19th century in Canton and other areas that were trading districts for foreign economies, for foreign countries. It's the same kind of thing here, okay, where foreigners could own and operate businesses. It worked in the past. It does two things. One, it welcomes outside industry into your country, and two, you can kind of keep an eye on them. So it's not a bad thing to do. And these are some of the special economic zones and some of the economic and development zones along the coast. And again, there's a couple of things here. By moving them to the coast, this is also, well, one, you land there and then there's where you work. But two, this begins in the late 80s and it continues now. Like, there is this huge drive in China to get the people urban, to get them to go from the country to the cities, and to urbanize China and to get the population there. Because remember, most of China is still over there in where you see the word China. So wouldn't be a bad idea to move them to the cities. And that's what we talked about. So after Mao's death in 1976, the communist leadership introduced economic reforms that relaxed state control of the economy, allowing for more initiative and permitting individuals to accumulate wealth. China's Sichuan province. I should know this. Well, there's no lines here, but anywho. Freed more than 6,000 firms to compete for business outside the state planning process. The result was remarkable. Under Deng Xiaoping, these reforms were expanded across the nation. China also began to permit foreign investment for the first time since 1949. Between 1978 and the end of the 1990s, foreign investors had committed more than $180 billion to China. Coca-Cola, McDonald's, Airbus have begun doing business there, but more than 100 million workers were still employed in state-owned enterprises, and most foreign-owned companies were segregated into those special, like we talked about. So, like it says here, you have two economic sectors because of this. You have the one economic sector was efficient and connected to international markets. The other dominated by government and directed by political decisions. So, the inland ones were government driven. I mean, it's just amazing how, and you think of China as big economically now. Had they, I don't know, I guess they're doing what they think is right for China, and that can really, at the end of the day, it really can't be wrong. All right. China developed a space program and nuclear weapons with intercontinental capabilities. Thank goodness for the Chinese space program, or Matt Damon never would have made it back home from Mars. Deng's reforms led to economic growth, higher standards of living for Chinese people, improved relations with other nations. Gosh, it just sounds like it's winner, winner, chicken dinner. In China, where almost a quarter of the human race still live under a communist regime, The economy was also changing with the times. China's leaders embraced the market and instead of insisting on equality, said the Chinese should try to make themselves rich. Um, Individual enterprise and increased spending on consumer products was the only way China would be able to fulfill its four modernizations policy and become a major economic power by the end of the 20th century. While the Chinese came to resemble Western capitalism in the ways they acquired and spent money, with productions soaring by some 10% a year, their elderly leaders remained in unchanged political control, determined to stamp out any sign of dissent or desire for democracy. China's economic growth depended on the manufacture of consumer goods for export to the rest of the world. By 1995, some 60% of toys for the international market were made in southern China, where 3,000 factories were staffed by more than 1 million workers, most of them young women. Their wages were lower than those that would have been paid to workers in most other countries, but they were for the first time earning money that enabled them to make consumer choices of their own. Women were leaving the farms to go work in the factories. Um, and again, the issue about how much they're being paid is relative. It's not horrible if you're Chinese. And the point at the bottom can't be understated enough. These are women putting money in their own pockets. Some will go home and some they'll say, but this is money they're putting in their own pockets that's going to allow them to be consumers. Consumers are decision makers. That's like one of the earliest processes in being an effective decision maker. This or this, which is worth it? How much do I have to work? What's the cost benefit analysis? Like, you don't think that way when you want to buy something, but that's what you're doing. And those people who take a long time to make a decision about a purchase, they're weighing the options. And these people are getting their first glimpse at how to weigh an option. And you don't have any options as a consumer if you don't have any money. So giving them wages is a marked change in their lives. People post-democracy notes, pro-democracy notes. Economic freedoms led some Chinese to demand greater political freedoms as well. And again, sort of kind of along the same lines as the French Revolution or most revolutions, when you, begin that, you have more money and you feel like you can make choices where you live, what you eat. You also notice where your money is going from a tax standpoint. And you begin to feel that, well, I'm more a part of this society, this machine. Well, there should be other freedoms that go along with this. There's more I'd like to do. There's more choices I'd like to make. I'd like to have. Internal problems cannot be solved overnight, but must be constantly addressed as part of a long-term process. Mistakes and shortcomings will be inevitable, but these are for us to worry about. This is infinitely better than facing abusive overlords against whom there is no redress. Those who worry that democracy will lead to anarchy and chaos are just like those who, following the overthrow of the Qing dynasty, worried that without an emperor, the country would fall into chaos. To such people, I'd like to say, with all due respect, we want to be the masters of our own destiny. We need no gods or emperors, and we don't believe in saviors of any kind. We do not want to serve as mere tools of dictators with personal ambitions for carrying out modernization. We want to modernize the lives of the people. Democracy, freedom, and happiness for all are our sole objectives. Wei Zhongshang from the Fifth Modernization. He spent the next 18 years in prison for, I guess, trying to achieve this stuff. So again, you can have your money and you can have that kind of life and you can have what comes with it. But the way things are is the way things are. Not to mention the fact that how many thousands of years of tradition do we have when we're talking about China? The goddess of democracy. It's a paper mache of the Statue of Liberty. Again, anyway, sorry. Demonstrations occurred in Tiananmen Square in Beijing and demanded more rights and freedoms, one of them being democracy. And this was a college student, by and large, a college student revolution, a college student revolt. Again, why is it that dictators throughout history go after the intellectuals and the professors first? Because they raise people who think for themselves. And when you start to think for yourself, you begin to question certain things and then you want change. That's why education is the key. to fix in this country. Education across the country. Troops and tanks dispersed demonstrators. Thousands were killed, indicating China's leaders would violate people's rights to stay in power. Again, I'm pretty sure you could think of many examples of that in our history. There is Tank Man. There's a documentary on that guy. They don't know where he is. He just walked in front of them. He scolded them. The tanks turned. He moved in front of them. And then somebody on a bike rode out and escorted him away. But no one ever saw him after that. Not on TV, nowhere. It is necessary to take a clear-cut stance against disturbances. So this is the Communist Party ruler seeing these college students and seeing these protests as disturbances. We saw this maybe you didn't, but I did. 3-4 years ago or 3 years ago in Hong Kong with the umbrella protests, where they stood outside with their umbrellas and peacefully protested what China was doing and how China was going back on what they said they were going to give Hong Kong when Hong Kong came back to be part of China, when England gave it up. The true number of deaths will probably never be known, and it is possible that thousands of people were killed without leaving evidence behind. But based on the evidence that is now available, it seems plausible that about 50 soldiers and policemen were killed, along with 400 to 800 civilians. That's from the New York Times. At 4 a.m. Sunday, lights on the square were suddenly put out. Through the loudspeaker, we again heard orders to clear out. The voice in my head said over and over, "The moment has come." Moments later, machine guns erupted. They were shooting right at the chests and the heads of the students. How many people died altogether? I don't know. Am I pessimistic? No, I'm not at all pessimistic, because I have seen the will of the people. I've seen the hope of China. It would be a lie to say that we were not afraid, but we were mentally prepared and very determined. Some students could not believe that the army really would use deadly force. But most of all, we were motivated by a powerful sense of purpose. We believed that it would be worth sacrificing our lives for the sake of progress and democracy in China. And I'll bet you anonymous by choice. Britain returned Hong Kong, speaking of Hong Kong, to China in 1997. China promised Hong Kong a degree of autonomy and protection of social and economic systems. And what one country promises and what one country delivers are two entirely different things. China remains a communist dictatorship, but its embrace of capitalism made it the second highest GDP in the world. That's great, but you see what choice does. And a taste of that, I mean, it is a type of freedom for to make a choice is what you do with your money and what you afford yourself to buy. And, freedom begets freedom, and at some point in time, they're going to want to be free. So it's going to be interesting to see how China plays itself out. Short and sweet. That's Japan, and that is China, and you can see some overlaps, some differences. Not a whole lot about those other four countries, but they are all doing quite well economically. Again, you can read more about those in your textbook. So that is next little segment of our unit. We're going to talk about human rights. And we're going to look at some various violations of human rights. And there's some stuff going on now that will help us keep things in context. So until then, I'll see you later. I'll probably see you later tonight, and I'll definitely see you tomorrow. Be good, everybody.